Hey, sorry you can't be with us in class today. I decided to just do this little video and let you know what we were going to be doing if you were able to join us. All right. So let me share my screen with you. We're going to be talking about leading change today. And I said leading positive change because not all change is positive. Of course, maybe it's whether it's negative change or positive change, you got to lead it, right? Um, See, any like I say any like eighth grader, I should say, could lead an organization when things are going well. But it's when things are rocky and when changes have to happen, that's when it takes a high level of leadership. If we think about it, I'm going to talk about Lewis and Clark today, the Great Adventure. Um, Remember, they went out west on the core of discovery to find the Northwest Passage to China. And they went up the Mississippi River, and then the Missouri, and they went all the way out to like Montana. And then they thought that if they could hike these mountains, they hefted their canoes up to the top of a mountain, and they thought they would find a river on the other side that would take them all the way out to the coast, but that's not the way it was. What they found was that they had to, they just saw mountain ranges, lots and lots of ranges of mountains, and they realized that canoeing wasn't going to work. They had to figure out a new way to canoe the mountains. See, there were unexpected realities that came, and they had to adjust the plan in order to accommodate the unexpected reality. And that's the way it is in most leadership. There are unexpected realities that happen, and we have to be able and willing to adapt and to adjust in order to accommodate the unexpected reality. You see, reality is just ahead, and what that's Dupree said, like the first Max, it was Max Dupree who said the first step of leadership is defining reality, like accepting it as it is, not as we wish it would be. That's one of the lines in the Serenity Prayer, accepting life on its own terms. And that's what we got to do. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, said James Baldwin. So let me just give you a few principles for leading change. How do you go about it? And how do we have the right kind of mindset when change is necessary? The first thing to remember is that change is life and life is change. I mean, we shed skin cells. In fact, while you're watching this, you've probably already shed a few thousand skin cells, like there's just dead skin cells everywhere because you're changing. Your life is changing. Your body is changing. Life is all about change. And Benjamin Franklin said, when you're finished changing, you're finished. You're done, right? You're done. And whether you want to change or not, you're still going to change. Like there was this little town that I traveled through all the time when I was visiting my home place back in Ohio, and I'd go through this little town, and those guys decided they weren't ever going to change. They want to keep it exactly the same. And so they didn't bring in any new industry, no new stores, no new anything. They just kept it exactly the same. And year after year, decade after decade, I would drive through that little town and I noticed something. They didn't change anything, but everything changed. That town became a ghost town. The old garage, the sign was hanging down. It was dilapidated. The one mom and pop grocery store that they never wanted to change was now boarded up. It changed, all right. The question is, if life has changed and change is life, the question is, what kind of change do you want to have? Because you're going to change. You just have to determine which kind. And if you don't change, if you don't like change, this is what General Eric Shinsky said. Shinsky? Shinsis? Yeah, Shinsky. Yeah, whatever. Whatever he said. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. So one thing about change, change is life. Life is change. Not all change is positive. Some changes are not good at all. Like I had to change some things with my diet and things like that because of cholesterol. That's a change. It happened in me. That's not a good change. Sometimes pastors can change things and they think that that's good, but change for change's sake is not good. I mean, change should be for a purpose, right? There should be a reason why you change. Like Keith Drury said, you can change without growing, but you cannot grow without changing. So you got to change, but don't change for change's sake. You change for something bigger, something more meaningful than that. So before you make a change, you should ask these questions, and not just organizationally, but in your own life, right? Is this a good idea? Actually, I put the word great idea because a lot of times good ideas, you can talk yourself into a good idea, even though it's not a great idea. And usually the enemy of great is good. And so is it a great idea? Am I doing it for the right reason? Is this the right time for this change, or should it be another time? And are we going about it the right way? And speaking about going about it the right way, there are two aspects to that, right? There we go. Move me over here. Like in a football game, there are goals and there are boundaries. The goals, like, are we trying to make it to the end zone, and are we staying within bounds? And so sometimes people try to do something. They'll say, I'll do it with any means possible. I'm going to make this thing happen. And they step out of bounds morally and ethically. Or they go the wrong direction and it's not achieving their goal at all. And so you want to make sure that you're aiming towards the right goal and you're within whatever the preconceived values are of the organization. Those are the boundaries, the shared values, the core values. One thing about change is that it's always resisted. Always resisted. People are always against it, right? The only person who likes change, said Mark Twain, is a baby with a wet diaper. And it is like there's a story of this church. A friend of mine actually pastored that church. He said that it was years ago, and they had an outhouse out back. Do you see the outhouse over here? There it is. It's out back of the church. And so they had a meeting to talk about having indoor plumbing in their church. And they thought it was going to pass easily. And it was, everybody wants to have indoor plumbing. They don't have to go out to the outhouse in Minnesota in the wintertime. And it was just about ready to take a vote. And then some old man stood up and says, I have a problem. I have a problem with this. He says, do you realize what do people do in outhouses? What do they do in toilets? And then he said, do you want people doing that in God's house? Well, it went down. They voted it down. They voted it down. See, people don't like change. I don't think God minds too much if people have indoor toilets in his house. But the question is why? Why do they resist change? One is tradition, right? It's just the way we've always done it, like the outhouse guy. That was his tradition. You can't have indoor plumbing. That's a church can't ever do that. Like my mother would never eat inside of a church, and so the church they turned the sanctuary, the old sanctuary, into a fellowship hall, and she had some real trouble with that because it was not her tradition to eat inside of a church. Sometimes we resist because of comfort or habit. That we just get into a mode or zone and we don't want anything to mess that up. And so change messes it up, right? And so this brings us to the thing. If you're the leader, you need to keep it within the zone of tolerance. And so like in the green zone, this is the comfort zone. Everybody just feels comfortable, but you don't grow with that. You don't move forward in the comfort zone. But there's a red zone, which is overstretching. This is the panic zone. It's too much. But there's this one that's just a little bit past the comfort zone, but it's not to the panic zone. And this is where it is. That's called the zone of tolerance. And so if you can find what that is, then you can nudge them up. But one of the reasons why is sometimes people push people past the stretch zone to the panic zone. And then some people just want to stay in that comfort zone. And that's one reason why people resist change. Another one is fearing the unknown, that we just don't know what's going to look like, that we're afraid of what's going to happen, particularly if there's money involved, stuff like that. Sometimes people resist change because the purpose is unclear. They don't get it. They don't see why this should be done, and they don't understand. And then sometimes people resist change just because of wisdom. It's a smart thing to resist this change because it's a stupid change. So sometimes God puts wise people to stop stupid pastors from being goobers, right? Remember, don't be a goober, right? And sometimes it's just best to listen. Oops. Uh-oh. And then there are some that they resist change because the change represents a loss. So, like when we moved from our little house on the prairie building to a brand new, beautiful, big new building, people were upset somewhere. And the reason why is because the old building was tied to their mother's funeral, their wedding, all kinds of things. And we needed to grieve that loss. So we actually had a funeral for the old building, and it helped them. The fourth principle of change is people adapt to change in different ways and at different speeds. And we have to understand that. So if somebody's just slow to get it, doesn't mean they're against you. It just means they're a slow adapter. Let's see if we can, where'd this go? Here we go. Yep. So if you look at it, like just about 2% of people are the ones that create things. Like I'm an innovator, but I'm only 1 out of 2% of that. The other 98% are not. And about 16% are the laggards. So there's some of them that will never come along no matter what you do. Maybe 5% will say never, 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 never. And then you have these people that are on the front end of things, and then you have people on the back end. You'll notice 68%, about 70% are in the middle, and they're going to come along. So you get it. You see, if you do the first part of this, if you give patience with it, then you're going to get 85% of the people. And that's pretty good, right? And then even the laggards will drag along eventually. So you end up with 95% of the people if it's a smart change and it's a necessary change. The people in the middle have to be convinced. And these are people that you call healthy skeptics, right? Healthy skeptics. Now, this is reversed, okay, than the first one, but the trailblazers are out front and they are just all the way, but sometimes they don't see some of the dangers. And they're the cynics that are way on the other side. They see the dangers very clearly and they're opposed to everything. But the people in the middle, they have to ponder it and work it through. And so somewhere between the trailblazers and the cynics, they figure out what the healthy thing is. And these guys are the ones that determine whether the change is going to happen or not. So if you're getting ready to do a change, what you want to do is what is called a force field analysis. And a force field analysis is it's an analysis of two different forces. There are forces for the change, and then there are restraining forces that are obstacles to change. And whichever force is the strongest, that's what's going to decide which direction it moves, right? And so as you think about a change maybe that needs to be made in your life, it's that way. Like if you want to start a new habit, there are obstacles to that, and there are forces for it. And which one wins? And that will determine whether or not you actually implement this new change in your life. Now, with change, with the force field analysis, the opposition on it, there's going to be critics. Absolutely. I've made lots and lots and lots of changes. And I had critics for every single one of them. If you have thin skin, you shouldn't be in ministry. Go drive an ice cream truck, right? So if you're going to implement, you got to overcome the critics. And to do that, if you're absolutely convinced it's the right thing, then it's worth having some critics. And so you just got to implement it anyway. But here's how you do it. Here's what you do. First of all, you clarify the big why, the purpose. Why are we doing this? And make sure that you know that, and that's crystal clear in your mind and in your leaders' minds. The second thing is to earn trust. And as you do trustworthy kinds of things, you gain credibility and change with people, and then you cash that in. I'm not going to spend a long time on that, but I'll talk about that more in class. But I call it change. Like you get change in your pockets relationally with people. And then when you make a big change, you expend change from your pocket. You got to make sure that you're not in the red, that you're in the black. That's what you want to be, right? You want to be sure that you have plenty of change left over in your pocket after you've expended the change. Sometimes people do this way too early, and that's the reason why they go bankrupt and they get voted out. Now back to that zone of tolerance. This is part of that too, is building trust, right? If you do beyond what people expect, they're going to be delighted, right? If you underperform, it's going to be unacceptable. They're going to be dissatisfied. But if you do what's acceptable, it'll be adequate. They'll be satisfied. The more you delight them, the more you put zeros behind the one. Like if one is satisfaction, a delight is 10, right? And so if you can do something that's just delightful for people, that you show up and you bless them and you love them and you remember their names and you care for them. Love brings delight. And so the more you do that, the more change you have in your pocket that you can expend making changes later on when they're necessary. Now, another piece to this on building trust is this, that there are paradoxes. Paradox are like, that's like two opposites, but they both are held in tension. So if you look at the ones, there's you're capitalizing on strengths, or going against the grain. There's you see the difference here. So self-reliance versus trusting others with stuff, optimism versus realism, being tough, being empathetic, urgency and patience, catalyzing change, coping with transition. Do you see? So like basically you have to hold all of that in tension, and the more you can hold it in tension without going off the log on either side too much, that's where trust builds, because people are wired differently, right? That's why we got to honor the process. So whatever the process is for making change that everybody kind of understands and agrees upon, that's what you need to follow. If you don't honor the process, if you short circuit the process, that's when opposition comes in strong. And I've seen a lot of great ideas be gunned down because the leader wasn't patient enough to honor the process and to get buy-in from that healthy skeptic group, right? One way you can implement changes to minimize disruption. And what I mean by that is, let's say if you want to start a contemporary service, if you want your church to be contemporary, but it's a traditional like old hymn service, well, you don't like just say get up the next morning and announce Sunday morning and say, we're going to go contemporary. We're going to have a rock band next Sunday. No, what you do is you start a contemporary service and keep the other one. And so by having both, then that minimizes the disruption for the people that like the traditional service, right? I mean, you can do it the other way, but you just lose all the traditional people, and they're usually the ones who tithe. They're the ones that will fund your contemporary service. And you better just expect trouble. There's going to be problems. People are going to be upset. Things are going to be misunderstood. I mean, you just better don't think you're going to do a change without problems, because the problems are there, right? But those who cause trouble, a lot of times they're not really your enemy. They're your clarifiers. The critics are your clarifiers. See, if you can't answer in a good way what the critic is saying, then the chances are that you made a crummy decision. And so the critics just help you make sure that you are doing your homework, so that the people that are in the middle there, that those guys will understand, and it makes common sense, right? If it doesn't make sense to the majority of people, it probably is not the right time or the right thing, or you haven't communicated it in the right way. Whatever you do, though, don't let petty people prevail. I am surprised at how many churches are held captive by petty people. they're just small thinking, whining, and so, well, we don't want to upset Martha, so we'd better just not do this or that. No, upset her. It's okay to upset her. If you want to get the job done, you can't let just one person who gets upset about something derail the whole thing. If somebody is really ballistic and they're coming in, they're yelling at you and all that kind of stuff, here's something that's helped me to not let them get under my skin. Keith Drury taught me this. He said, you shrink them down to they're about this big, and you open up a little cage and you stick them inside the cage and you lock the cage, and then you let them yap. You're like, you hello. You just wave at them and stuff in the cage, and then just go on and do your thing. Love them like a little bird in a cage. Just think of them as a pretty little bird going beep 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 beep, and then you can just love them, but just keep doing your stuff. Um, one way to implement change is to celebrate wins, the little things that count, right? And so, like, if there's a tiny little thing, you just celebrate it, because change is hard. And so when you have a small win, you celebrate it, and then you have a bigger win, you celebrate that in a bigger way. The more celebrations you can have, the better it is. People feel good about that. Now, Bill Esom writes about unfreezing moves, and I think this is really important. Usually, like the way things are done, it's a certain way, it's frozen. But a time of transition, it kind of brings up the heat and it melts it. And this is where all the conflict and everything gets jumbled, and everything gets upset, and people get all tense and anxious and all of that. But then you make the change and then you freeze it again. And so people can't live in flux forever. They've got to live in frozen. They can't walk on unfrozen water. You gotta walk on the frozen water. The thing is, make sure that what you're molding it into is worth keeping for a while. You can do some experiments. I mean, experiments are the unfreezing, and that's a gentle way to unfreeze things. Make it like slush for a while, and then freeze it up. That's the way I would recommend it. But it's unfreeze and then freeze. If you make an abrupt change without doing some unfreezing, and the unfreezing is the process. That's turning up the heat a little bit. It's having conversations about what could be and stuff like that. And if you don't do that, what happens is you end up breaking the ice. It just shatters, right? If stuff shatters, churches split, people get mad, they leave, stuff like that. All right, this is from a guy named Cotter, who is probably one of the best change management people in the world today. And as he writes up for business, but boy, I think this is true for church. He says this is the 8 steps to implement change, to create change. You have to create the climate for change, you enable the organization to change, and then you implement and sustain the change. And the way you do that is you have to create a sense of urgency. Like, if it's not really urgent, then don't do it. But if it is really urgent, then make sure they understand that it's urgent. And then you form a coalition of people that are like-minded. You need a few of these people. If you're the only one, you're not going to lead the change. Drury writes about that, or David Drury in Confident Leader. There's an interview with him, and he talks about how you got to bring people with you. Then they got to see a preferable future, and then you communicate that. You give people the power to actually act. You create quick wins that are little wins that you celebrate. Then you build on that change, and you just continue to do it over and over and over again. Do all this stuff, and then eventually it creates a momentum that creates the new reality, and you can freeze it back into that. And what do you do about sacred cows? And the answer to that, because there are sacred cows, right? There are certain things that have just been that way forever and ever and ever. I tell you what, sacred cows, they make gourmet hamburgers. Sacred cows make gourmet hamburgers. All right. Well, that's kind of the Reader's Digest condensed version of what I'm going to be sharing. They're going to be doing some class discussion and stuff. But if you turn in your notes to me, I'll count you present for today. Have a good one. God bless. Bye.